but trees, alternative virtual reality.
All right. Hi, Fabien.
Hey, Joachim. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, welcome. And I mean, you should say welcome. We are in your space.
That's true. Welcome to my space.
Yes. And we're going to talk about virtual spaces. And yeah, I can give an introduction to how we met. We were both interested in virtual reality memory palaces, or visually and spatially structuring information by means of virtual reality. And yeah, since then we've had a couple of talks, some in VR, about this. What's the potential of it, of organizing space in VR, like you've done here. And yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit about why you were interested in this and what you've been doing for the last years.
Sure, with pleasure. So yeah, like I said, welcome to this, or the space. It's, to me, it's a little bit more than a space. Like it's a window to my mind, really. Sounds a bit too much, but at least that's the goal. And how it started is that, like, about 12 years ago, I started to, let's say, because we can talk about philosophy, then I started to think about what made me me, what was my sense of identity. And bit by bit, I thought what made me me was what was different from other people, let's say. And what was different was thoughts that were unique, thoughts and actions that are unique, and that nobody else had before. And then I thought this is unrealistic to do that or think about that without having some substrate to list those ideas. And then I started to list them down, basically, in any format I could. And initially, it was just a text file with line numbers, like ID number one, actually no line numbers, ID number one, or the idea itself, and then the second one and third. And what started to happen is the third idea was related to the first one. And then I started to have a notation system to make references from one idea to the other. And then growing from this, I started to do mind maps, for example. I started to use spreadsheets, a lot of different tools, basically. But the one that really made it for me was Wiki, because I can create links, literal links, not just a reference, let's say line 1 to 52, but link and the power. So those are pages of my Wiki, actually. And the power of the Wiki, in my opinion, is if you take a link here, those links exist. So the blue text are links, and the black text is just text. But you can make a link to content that doesn't exist. So this is my page about tools. So I can list FFmpeg, Mozilla Hubs, AWS, JavaScript, whatever. But let's imagine that today you tell me about a new tool that I never heard of. Then I can make a link to a page that doesn't exist yet. And I found it very powerful. It's like you don't know yet what content you will put in, but you know it's related. And then you can expand and stay organized, I think, very efficiently. So yeah, I started to have a wiki as a solution to organize my mind and what would make me, I believe, unique about 10, 11 years ago, more or less. And then 5 years ago, I tried the Oculus DK1 for the Tuscany demo. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm in Tuscany. I've been in Tuscany before, but I'm in Brussels and in Tuscany. It was just a mind-blowing moment. And my second thought was, after wow, amazing, was I could have posters equivalent of my ideas all around. I could have. So now that we're in there, let's say, in one version, as far as, very imperfect, but still there. When I was talking about it or thinking about it 5 years ago, that was using my hands to something that did not exist. So I was just like imagining posters of my notes, but today it's there. So it's kind of a weird feeling, let's say. It took 5 years, more or less, and it's nowhere near finished. But at least now I do air quote with my hands, but it exists now. It has some basis for criticism also. So yes, this is what brought me basically to VR and to memory palaces and to exploration indeed on how to structure information through natural interactions, basically.
Yes. And it's such a great idea. The first thing that got me to VR as well was the idea of memory palaces, just being able to take something that you sort of have in your mind and externalize it into the space around you. And I also found that it was a magical feeling because I had a certain space in my mind already that I had envisioned, but now I was able to sort of suddenly immerse myself in it. But what do you think the potential is of this, or the current effects? I mean, in terms of not just having 30 tabs in Google Chrome, but actually organizing this spatially around you. How do you feel regarding that?
So it's I think it's very, very different than having 30 tabs in Chrome, because those 30 tabs, so they have an order. It's not random either. You can put them sequentially in a different order, but it's very abstract. And I think when it's abstract, at least most of us, including me, I can remember a couple of items in an unstructured list, but not many more than, let's say, 5, more or less, except if I do like a really intense effort. But this is not what happens in general regarding spaces. Usually physical spaces, but I think it applies to virtual places that you navigate to. I think navigation, most of us are really talented, let's say. I don't like to use the word talented because in general there is a lot of work behind talent. But I think for this, most of us are, again, quote unquote, natural at it. And one example I like to mention is, for me at least, I have a friend in Bretagne, in France, where I come from. It's about 1,000 kilometers away from Brussels, where I'm at right now. But I can tell you, even though I haven't been there for years, how to get to the bathroom in his place. And it's like there is no practical information for me to know this now, and I did no effort to try to remember, to recall, but I can just navigate there. And I think that's a great example on how extremely efficient we are, not just at storing information in a random fashion, just because those 30 tabs, for example, I think it's really hard to just give them sequentially, but to be able to go through a place that is 1,000 kilometers away that you haven't visited in 5 years and navigate through naturally, I think shows that there is huge potential there. And this is basically the idea behind this, or memory palace. We hijack part of the brain that are so efficient at whatever, let's say, navigating through a space, but for something more abstract, like organizing ideas or whatever we want to use it for. It could be remembering a grocery list, or hopefully, I hope. That's why when people mention memory palaces, I try to start the conversation. It's great, but I think it's important then after to go a bit deeper. This is not to remember things. Okay, remembering, of course, is the first step, but after this, it's to get more ideas, to get better ideas, or to structure information and say, oh, all those tools, this list of tools doesn't make sense. They should be structured by maybe server-side tool for programming, maybe not, maybe, I don't know. That's the whole point, is to find the structure behind those pieces of information.
Yes, that's quite cool, because it is also possible to conceive of memory palaces not necessarily just as a means to remember, but in like an extended way as mind palaces, sort of places for work, or just being places that are designated with a function. I mean, to those who are watching on YouTube or listening in the podcast version, we can also just give a brief description of what a memory palace traditionally is, because this was a method that has been utilized for thousands of years, basically, since the ancient times when people visualized visual associations to things they wanted to recall at given spatial locations. Yeah. And VR, of course, can utilize this as a base. But it's really interesting what you're saying. I mean, it doesn't have to be just to remember, because places for ideation, as in your case, a place where you are and you have everything around you and can connect this to new concepts.
Yeah. No, there's so much more to do, and it's. But if we want to give an example, let's say of memory palace as a technique, is showing people. Let's say you put an ID here. So I just have one 3D object that I put in the room for demo. But let's imagine you have to go to the ophthalmologist. They have this eye, and then let's say here it's not the case, but let's imagine that this looks roughly like my office. And this is like the meeting room in my office, and I have to go first to the ophthalmologist, and then I would have after to go to, what's the name? I don't know, the grocery or something. Then I would go out. So I will teleport there in the outside of the room. And in here, I would put another 3D object. I don't know if I can, I think I can just draw it rather. Let's say for the grocery, let's say I make an apple. I'm telling you it's an apple. Clearly I'm not a 3D artist, so that's why. But basically I would do this, and then I would go, if I have a third item, I would go in another distinct place. So for example, the top of the mountain, etc., etc. And then once you do, honestly, the first time you hear this, like, I don't know if it works. And then when you try it, it's magical. Like you just remember because you've been in that space and you associate it. You spend a bit of time to associate the concept, let's say the apple or the eye with the optician, to a space. And when it's a space you're familiar with, you just navigate through it, and then an ordered list becomes very easy to recall and remember. So yeah, just wanted to give a more practical example of the memory palace as a technique.
Yes. And what you're saying, that it's surprising that it works, it's a good point. And it also seems like, it's so much work just to remember a couple of things, but these things really stick in your memory. So if you use this method to recall like 200 items or something, you can really remember it's all in the correct order. It requires some maintenance, but it's really effective.
Yes, and it looks like the first time you see it, it sounds like a magic trick, that you have to be smart to do it. So you think, it's for someone else, not for me. And then when you just follow the technique, and I found this as a great example to consider intelligence as a set of techniques. It's just a lot of effort to do things the right way, and once you have the right quote unquote way to do it, then that's why I'm addicted to tools. Let's say I find really beauty in tools. Just like, for example, here also I have the Remarkable, which is a e-ink tablet made in Norway.
That's right.
Designed in Norway, at least. And I really recommend it. But the point is, what I do is I bring it in VR, and I can sketch, or in real life, but let's say in VR, is that I have a copy of my screen. So I just sketch in real life, and then I can extract from the screen those, let's say, slides or notes, whatever. But it's just that, it's just a tool. It's not more than this. But when you can have the right tool for the right task, then you delegate intelligence or wisdom or whatever to the tool. And I think it's really powerful, because as if we consider ourselves as animals, we can't do anything, right? We can't run, we can't swim, we can't fly. But you get a car, you get a plane, you get a piece of paper, just like this, to write ideas, and then it starts to be much deeper and much. So I really, I'm in awe in our ability both to create tools and use them.
Yes, that's right. The human way is to embody the tools and act through them. We have been discussing a bit that the textual blog, which this podcast thing sort of originated from, Matrice, sort of how we can virtually extend our minds, based on David Chalmers and another guy's sort of notion of how we embody technologies. And taking the memory palace as an example of a way to virtually extend our minds is a really good example because we are offloading certain cognitive functions to the technology, and they take part in and constitute our thinking process. So, I mean, eventually it will maybe be hard for you to to work without the VR. I mean, if you are extending your mind into the VR already and have this as a part of your mind, if you lose your Quest or whatever one day, then it may feel like an amputation.
It's not one day, it's today.
Yeah.
Like just before we had this conversation, I updated this room on my server to do some new things that I might try to show you. It might break everything. It's all very new. Like it was literally updated minutes before we had the chat. And it is very frustrating because basically the better the tool is, let's say the Remarkable or the Quest or Mozilla Hubs or even writing down on a piece of paper, you rely on it and you internalize it. And it literally feels like your limb, like your arm got cut or something. So it is extremely frustrating. So I think it's a one-way street, but I find it also, I don't know if it's a great example for this, but Sherry Turkle wrote a book on the danger of having bad communication, let's say, that we're so used to our phones, addicted to our phones, that we put the phone on the table, we don't even notice it, but then gradually, anytime we have a moment of boredom, we check the phone. And when we do this, the conversation remains very shallow. We never talk about meaning of life or whatever. If we know the person at any point has any doubt in front of us, they're going to check their phone. It just doesn't work anymore. And what she suggests basically is having the phone is great when you're conscious of your usage of it and your addiction. And if you don't have a phone, that's fine. If you do, but you know that you can have addiction or problems with it, then you put it in a box and you don't use it. So I think having a tool like this, which I am depending on, but also knowing that it can break, or I can break it, or I can have no connection and whatnot, and be ready for it. Let's say both mentally but also emotionally, because it really feels frustrating when it doesn't work. I think can help to alleviate some of the stress, let's say, caused by it. But I do think it's a one-way street. I think once you start to have a good tool, you need it. You can't go back, basically.
Yeah, but it's interesting to note, at least, and to have seeing it for what it is, so that one can establish a free relationship to it, at least knowing what kind of bounds one are in. That must be better. Yes. So that, it's reflection, at least.
To be honest, one thing I considered, I didn't dare do this, but so those notes are about, depends, this is like a couple of days old. Some notes in there, some of the oldest page in my wiki, they are 10 years old, other are 1 year old. On top of it, actually, if you can go back inside, so let's teleport. And if we take this note, for example, you see on the top, so I will just slide a bit more. On the top, there is a timeline. So it's very small, but those little dots here, they are blue or green, and then the different years. So this page is about 10 years old, I would say, because I see 10 years lines. And then I edited mostly once 10 years ago, and then 8 years ago, I would say. So whenever I see a page, then I can instantly see the history or the lifeline, let's say, of this page. And this is really outdated, let's say. I didn't touch this for quite a while, so it's probably too old. But yeah, there is this kind of having to recall that all those are impermanent and they have a limited time, let's say, without being changed again or updated. And it also has a lot of weight. Let's say maybe having those is weighting me down. Maybe I should just delete everything, all those notes, because then I would have start from scratch, and maybe then I would focus on what matters. but I never dare do this. It's thousands of pages. It's just for this page, it's, I don't know, dozens of edits. Some are very small, but some are big, some are meaningful. They are linked together, like those pages are not independent. There is some connection. So deleting everything is really scary to me. Also, just losing it, the same way you mentioned that it's frustrating if I don't have a quest, but also if sometimes I got no backup of this and it's deleted, or all my backups are deleted, will I have an existential crisis? Because the more I delegate to it, and the more, as I mentioned, it's part of myself, losing it, let's say, would be. So one thought I had, of course, is let's just delete everything. Let's just start from scratch. The code also. I finally managed to get this going, even though it's not perfect, but it works. I can delete everything. I can delete all the data. I can delete all the code. So that's actually literally an option. It's not just for fun. It's a thought I had.
Fresh.
I don't know. Yes. Sometimes I think it's the right way, but I don't know.
This is in. We should also say that you're using Mozilla Hubs. We see your T-shirt.
Yeah.
I have a Mozilla T-shirt too. And again, for those who are listening or watching, I made a video on how you can actually use Mozilla Hubs for yourself, just to instantiate objects and make a memory palace yourself. But you are using Hubs Cloud, so you are doing your own scripting and these unique things here. The way I understood it, you are not actually placing them by hand yourself necessarily. So how is this room made? Or
so, for example, I'm thinking of a way to demonstrate it, but the easiest way to think about it is, yes, it's not done by hand because the wiki is about, I don't know, let's say 1,000 pages. It's a bit more than this, but 1,000 pages. So I can put them one by hand, which might be better in some way that then it's really curated. And I can also do it automatically, which is I pull a starting point, which is, let's say, the main page or the last edited page or just the list of all the pages. And then I gradually make a huge line, or I use the shape of the building to place them or something. So here what I did basically, because it's quite new, is I just took the page of the tools and then I put the first 20 items, the first 20 links that came from there, and I put them in no specific order, and then I manually grabbed them. But this is this is the layout itself, so how you put those pages. This is something I think a lot about, and it's without having a proper answer to it. I think, and it actually goes back to a discussion we had together, and also with Makung's VR founder, my tongue, but I can't recall.
Aaron Ralby.
Yes, Aaron Ralby, exactly. We had discussions about basically procedural generation versus doing everything by hand. What he does is do everything by hand. He creates a memory palace for languages mostly, and he takes the item, let's say about grammar in English, and then he puts it in a specific spot. And it's a great way, and it's like artisan work, let's say. It works. I believe at least that it goes somewhere in between, that you get an automatic layout, but then that is done rationally in the sense that, for example, the pages are spaced out in the minimum amount of fashion, so you don't have to have a hike to move them, but they are not overlapping. So you get like the best usage of space, but then you can manually grab them and move them around, and then save them. So yeah, that's the idea. Those pages are put automatically in a layout, but they don't have necessarily a lot of meaning, but they can also have. So that's what I meant by exploring. So a wiki is a graph, so it's a set of nodes that are linked one to another. So you can use graph theory and visualization in graph theory, for example, to do the central nodes that will be at the center of the graph. The pages that are that have, let's say, just to summarize, that are the most well connected will be at the center, and things that are less connected will be at the periphery of the graph. So this is also something I explored in a previous WebVR, not based on Hubs exploration. Is I just make it looks a little bit like a city, basically, where each page has a height depending on the, and then they are linked together, and those links are a bit like roads, let's say. And it's the layout is based on graph centrality. So the middle of the graph is the most important page. It's very arguable. It's not necessarily human navigable. Like, we're not necessarily used to think of graph centrality, except if you're a researcher in the domain. But for most of us, doesn't necessarily mean much. So to find the intersection between automatic layout that is easy to navigate versus manually doing everything, I have no answer to this. I think it's fascinating, but what's the best way? I don't know.
Yeah, what's the best way? Because, I mean, in your wiki, which of course is a particular example for most people creating a VR memory palace today, they wouldn't already have a lot of information in an underlying structure, but you already have some sort of way that it is structured from beforehand. So if this would be translated, I mean, we can also think of the general Wikipedia. Of course, that would be a terrifying virtual environment, but if you could use the underlying interrelated sort of ontology that is defined on the web and turn it into something visual and spatial equivalent like you described, that could be really interesting.
So it can be done. I haven't explored this, but I mean, technically it's not a problem. And when you say carry Wikipedia, I guess you mean in terms of size. But then I would suggest that just like even this wiki is carry in terms of size. You don't want 1,000 pages in front of you. It's just overwhelming. Yeah. So with what you would do, the same way I suggest I do with mine, is you find a starting node in this graph. Let's say the topic you're most interested in. Let's say cognitive science. Then you take the page on cognitive science, and then you expand the first 10 nodes, and then again, then you can explore. You go on one node, let's say from cognitive science, you go to, I don't know, philosophy of mind, let's say, and then you expand there. So you navigate from one to the other, and then you can either just discard everything or keep it, or you can keep it expanded automatically, or you can move them around and then keep this and come back the next day. I think this is one of the most powerful value, let's say, of a tool like this is after our conversation, it doesn't disappear. This example is for me, for myself, and maybe nobody else care about it. Actually, I'm grateful that you're here, and then you can see this and you can criticize or say what is good or not, because that helped me a lot to push forward and be a little bit like, I'm really ashamed of all this because it's nowhere near finished. It kind of works, kind of doesn't work. So it's really hard for me to show it in general. But then when I do show it, I want to do it right. And if I want to do it right, then it pushes myself a bit to do just a bit more. So there are a couple more features there that I'll be happy to show. But yes, what I wanted to say is that the social aspect really brings a lot of value, paradoxically, because normally nobody cares or would have to care about my ideas or the tools I use. But when you have to show to someone, then you get a lot more out of it in terms of critics, in terms of suggestion, ideas, and everything. So it's really makes a big difference. But it's personal. It's just my idea. Whereas if we're in Wikipedia, it's, let's say, not common knowledge, but shared knowledge at least, or some shared knowledge. And I think these kind of models could apply both to personal information, but also, things like Wikipedia, or if in your university or in your company or your group of friends, you have a wiki, or even another CMS, whatever in the end, you could use this kind of processes and tools to explore the information you have, no matter how loosely structured or very structured it is. you can display it in a virtual environment and play with them, maybe discover more structure or just have fun with it. That also, I think that's interesting enough.
Because it's a normal thing to do. I mean, just if you're bored, go browsing on the web. And you have this Wikipedia function that just takes you to a random page in the wiki. And from there you can go on and on. So, yeah, if someone could develop this algorithm that you're mentioning, presenting it visually and spatially, and it's possible to imagine these environments where you have portals everywhere or small worlds that you can grab with your hand and take over your head, and now you're suddenly in that node that was connected to the other node. It could be an interesting way of discovery.
Yes, yeah. One, I've done it at some point, and I forgot for what it was, but you can just put the helmet on, and then you're in that other world. But yeah, graph navigation, because I think teleportation, when you mention a random page or teleportation, honestly, that got me a little bit worried, because when you do this, it's like a jump in the unknown. So if we go back to the memory palace technique where we have the eye, ear, and then we go outside and we had the apple and whatnot, which is very funny because I think it was a very silly example. I didn't even try to remember it, but I just do. So it's like, okay, it's simple, it's just 2 items, but still, it was so silly. But it works. But because there is also this path, this navigation, this continuity. So when you do a random page or when you jump from one thing to another and it's abrupt, then I think you might not necessarily lose navigation, spatial navigation, but at least some of it. So I would be a little bit cautious there. If you just say, I try not to teleport too much. It's fun to teleport and you're just here and you're just there. Okay, but I think if you can at least see the point from where you were to where you are, then you have this kind of continuity, and I think that probably helps a lot to memorize and then structure. So I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but I'm saying I'd be cautious about the consequence it has against natural, let's say, navigation.
Yes, but it's true. It's at least that one takes. Because you can also imagine memory palaces where there is fixed navigation, like a train ride. I remember I considered this in my research previously, but then you are missing this autonomous sort of decision of planning and going there. And there are lots of studies like, taxi drivers in London and their geographical knowledge from having to do this. They can really remember so much information because of their visual spatial organization around. But if you interview the bus passengers in London, I don't think they have the same relationship to
For sure.
Yeah.
But if you just take a walk in the city with a friend, you're invited as a tourist to the city and they walk you around.
Yeah, you don't remember anything.
You were here, you were there, okay, so go home or go back to the train station, you have no idea.
Yeah.
But if you were just thrown out there and you're like, go from here to somewhere, then you ask people, you check on the map, you look at the sites, like the church, whatever is big and unique, and without thinking too hard, you just do it automatically. And then you're surprised you can actually go back. But if it's someone else doing it for you, so that's why, it's a good example to do the automated path. I do think, of course, if you make your own decisions and then also you have to go back or you have a goal, let's say, I think those kind of mechanisms help quite a lot.
Yeah, but it can also be interesting to see. It would at least be nice to see research on this, to which extent we can push our normal way of conceiving spaces. I'm wondering, was it you that sent me the link to this sort of study on non-Euclidean geometry and how we could organize this?
Yes.
Yeah, do you remember something about that?
Well, that was actually, they have portals in it. And the good thing, it's easy for us to imagine that because we navigate in a Euclidean space, that our mind is representing space this way. That would be a one-to-one match. It's normal. That's the lazy, let's say, way. But I think what this paper was interesting was showing that because we can find shortcuts, very easily through, for example, portals. And portals, they break this this Euclidean representation. Then it means maybe it doesn't mean our structure in terms of neurons matches that, but somehow if we're really good at finding those shortcuts, it's possible that the representation of the information at least handles non-Euclidean geometry and, for example, portals really well. So yeah, that's interesting also to maybe not having a too naive way of thinking about space. Maybe we're and the way, and so this is just my own speculation, the way I think we might be trained for this, let's say, is, I mean, if we imagine, again, very naively, that there is no teleport actually in real life. You don't teleport. That doesn't work. But what would be, so it means in terms of biological evolution, being able to handle teleports doesn't really make sense. So my crazy suggestion for this is, for example, just if you fall asleep and when you wake up, you might be in the same place or you might have teleported in the sense that maybe somebody carried you somewhere, or maybe you fainted, or maybe you were in a riverbed and then you fell asleep and then, or an accident, whatever. And if somehow you're pure Euclidean geometry, then you would be literally lost. Whereas if you can find some ways, so portals or falling asleep and whatnot, and can handle teleportation, like falling asleep or losing consciousness and gaining it again, and then being able to connect the two, it might be something like this. But yeah, just talking out of, I don't know.
It's an interesting way of thinking, how do we even deal with it? That's a good point. Yeah, but I think maybe there is potential in it because, I mean, in one way, there is something nice with the embodied. This is why we are doing memory palaces. We already have hyperlinks that are presenting information out of seemingly no relation and taking us from one page to the next. But we want an embodied, more sort of wholesome way of relating to our spaces in VR. But yeah, maybe some sort of combination. VR is, of course, a way to do the impossible with flying and everything. We did also review a game that is, I'm wondering how games are going to utilize non-Euclidean geometry. And we can then maybe even define what it is. I mean, the way I understand it is basically impossible spaces that you can't really view from outside, but you can be fooled, especially in VR. So you can go around a corner and when you look back, it's not the same. And maybe we can be launched into a new way of thinking of spaces when we have experiences of these, but we need to experience it before we can ideate in those terms.
Yes. And to be honest, also, for example, that's, for example, this looks very boring in the sense that it could be an office space. But what I tend to do is, for example, for newcomers, for people who have not experienced VR, if I put instead of this space something completely crazy, then they're going to be like studying the most minute. They're just going to be, their brain is going to be like mind blown. It's like, oh wow. And whereas if you do it gradually, let's say you go from something a bit boring to something a little bit crazier and a little bit crazier, it makes the exploration more efficient. And even for people that are familiar with VR, I think we need basically a gentle transition away from things we're used to. And yeah, I think for manipulating information, navigating, starting from what is known to go crazier and crazier, I think makes more sense. And especially because, again, you don't want to do it alone. You want to do it with other people, do the trip or the hike across ideas together so that you get more ideas, or just having also a good time. So starting with something as we do, let's say just like Euclidean geometry, adding a couple of things here and there, seeing how it works or not. I think it's still an interesting path.
Yes. So for this space, of course, you've started this project and have made some success already. And by the way, I can mention that for those who are listening or watching, they can follow your progress on this on Twitter. What is your Twitter username?
I know, I'll try to draw it, but it's Utopia. Utopia with an H at the end.
Yeah.
So I'll put it. I have a little board here.
Very good. Yeah, there we have it.
There we go.
Awesome.
Yes, and everything I do is open source. So all the code for this is open source. All my explorations, I mean, the ones that are really silly or crazy, I don't honestly put. I wait a little bit to be a bit more clear about it, to be honest. But otherwise, everything is online. Everything is on a permissive license, so people can do whatever I want, whatever they want, rather precisely, not whatever I want, for the lapses. Whatever the heck they want, because I don't pretend to have any answer. Those are just explorations. I don't want to say I don't know what I'm doing, because there are thoughts behind it. There were studies that you mentioned and others, so it's not random either, but it's not actually the solution. It's a solution amongst many. That's also why I don't have, this is one prototype amongst many. I have dozens of prototypes about it. And every time it's a little bit different, better in some ways. But yeah, I will hope people can try those, can modify. And hopefully after they modify, they come back and say, oh, we did try this other navigation method and it was horrible, or it was amazing. Because I think none of us, no matter what research you're doing or exploration you've done, have necessarily the answer to what's the ideal way to think in VR, or to have VR help us to think better. But if we can help each other to explore faster, then I think we're getting somewhere.
Yes, I think it's a really cool discussion to have, and I hope that we can meet up. We had a meeting with Aaron Rolby, which is running the Linguisticator and the Magungs VR, which has sort of like a commercialized memory palace service, and Kent Bai, who has also talked and experimented about this for quite some time. So having these meetups, and like we're doing right now, is helps to sort of establish the concept and ideate new ways of doing this. I'm working on like a memory palace that is mapped like in a 1-to-1 scale to my apartment that I hope to be able to show quite soon. But in terms of your own visions for this, do you have any ideas that you're not able to implement, or that you hope to see one day in the future? I mean, what would your ideal realization of the?
So I'll not show you, but I will explain two ideas that should be working today, but I don't want to take risk and break everything. So the first one, since we're here, it's this, the save category. So we have the script here that explains it, but basically the space we're in. So I'll take back the pencil. So the space here, there are different ways to segment it. So basically, I will segment it this way. And then I can also segment it this way. And I can, of course, also segment it vertically. So we go back to have 4 spaces or more spaces, but I can also say, let's say around this, like 1 meter around in every direction, then something can happen. So what this does, this save category option, is those pages there, they can be part of different spaces. They can be above 1 meter, so that would be that space. They could be on this side of the space or the map or whatever you want to call it. And based on that, so if we go back on this wall, once those this mapping is applied, we have those categories. So if we can see, I'll try to get back the pen. So here we see the list of pages like PM Wiki, AWS, Hubs, blah, 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 Blender. And then they have categories like A, B, C, D, ABD. So A, for example, would be documents that are above 1 meter. Non-A would be below 1 meter, etc. So of course, A, B, C, D doesn't mean anything, but it could be A could be pages I need to read, B, pages I need to fix, C could be pages that I need to send to a friend. Doesn't matter. Those are abstract categories, can be anything. So basically that the pages, the way they are in space, will have an impact. And it's saved back in the wiki itself. Yeah, meaning that, for example, it's not just about VR. So I think it's important to mention this is when I remove the headset, it doesn't suddenly first disappear. I can go back the next day with you or without you. But also when I remove the headset and I go back to my 2D wiki, then it will be changed either with new categories or we can even create a page in the wiki. It doesn't matter, but it's a two-way street. It's bringing content in and saving it back in the wiki. So yeah, I think so that's working today. The only thing is it's not visual, so I could apply the modification, but you wouldn't see it. But yeah, that's working today, and I'm pretty excited by this. And the other thing, and again, same, this is my wiki, but it could be applied to another CMS.
Yes.
GitHub, for example, managing issues about the wiki or the tool itself. Then I can also sort the issue on the wall to say those are important, I put them there. Those are not important, I put them there. And then it changed the GitHub project board. And then we can manage Mozilla Hubs the same way.
That's a really cool idea.
I think it's very good.
Yeah, I like it.
It's not an idea anymore. It works today.
yes, right.
It's pragmatic.
Yeah, no, that's great because it's a way to use the space and the spatial. And I mean, when that eventually becomes a habit, it can be really powerful. Really cool. Yes. Really cool.
And the other thing, same that in here, there is a little bug, but it should be a PDF, like a PDF document. Did not load today, and I can't pull it easily from the headset, but let's imagine we have a working PDF there. I would then grab it and put it here on the origin for PDF sending sign, or not necessarily on it, but like 1 meter radius, more or less. And then what it would do is it would send it to my Remarkable. So that, for example, let's say I put in the category that this PDF about cognitive science and navigation and Euclidean geometry is very interesting. Then I put it here, and then my ebook reader is receive the PDF, and then I remove the headset. I go in my living room, or because it's still the confinement, so I don't go outside, and then I can read the document. And yeah, it's just I think the important example out of this is that VR is not for everything. It's part of a workflow, and for some things it's great. For reading text, it sucks. It's really bad for now. Even if you have the best headset, it's not as convenient as sitting on your couch or even sitting under a tree and just reading either paper or a nice ebook reader. So that's one example to say you don't spend the whole time in VR, and it doesn't have to be, let's say, just with virtual, let's say, the wiki itself, but with other devices like Remarkable, either like I showed outside with the input, like writing or reading after. So
yeah, that's
and that works today too.
So there's like a portal between everything, of course, is available both in 2D and not. But that's nice, just having a mailbox to your Remarkable.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. So,
and then the next, because you mentioned what was coming next or what I was most excited by.
Yeah.
The thing is now, so this works, being able to tag around, and then this works, being able to link to other systems or devices. That works. The next thing I think that is the most exciting, at least for me, is that here I drew the space of boundaries, let's say, that this sphere around it sends to PDF. But then I have to remove the headset, go to the computer and type the code, which is not a problem. I like it. And to be honest, it's also the most efficient today. But I posted recently on Twitter an example of Logo, the total language that I learned 20 plus years, let's say, something like this. This is how I discovered programming, making a little turtle move by applying small functions to it. So I made the same in VR, where you have, let's say, a whiteboard like we have here. But instead of having this, you have instruction, let's say, move forward, move backward, etc. So I'll draw it again. Let's say on the wall, in here you would have instructions, move forward, turn right, turn left. So I'll make some little arrows to symbolize that. And then you can clone them, those instructions, and then you can put them in the right order. So let's say move forward, turn left, move forward, turn left. And then the little turtle in VR, like this, would be here, move forward, turn left, and then move forward, and turn left. It will actually do it in VR. So that's fun, but I think what's interesting or important is that even if you don't care about the turtle, then you can apply it here. Meaning instead of moving around, it's an action like send PDF to Remarkable. And then you delimitate the space in VR, and you bind the space to an action. For example, sending PDF, organizing a category and everything. So it means, again, you don't do everything in VR. You can still program on the keyboard, but some of the action, let's say defining a zone, linking to a set of predefined action, could also be done directly from the headset.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing to come that I'm most excited with.
Oh, that's really cool, because then you can have some scripts that are possible to connect, but that are quite simple, but can, some basic functionality. Yeah, that's really nice. Yes.
So one of the most obvious functionality would be now if we remove the headset, all those drawings, they are lost because they're not pinned. It's a shame, but they're not necessarily amazing visually, but in terms of concepts, I think they're interesting. So what I would hope for is, for example, to have a little button or even draw. I guess the best would be to draw a button here, or even just say save like this. And then if I do, I think, I'm not logged in, but I could get this as one 3D item and then have those functions and link the two. And then next time I would grab something else, put it there, it would do it. Again, based on a small list of items. But so it means every time you can prototype and iterate faster, I think you can think further, basically. And when we have ideas like this discussing, I don't want them to be just paper or text or video, but rather to be actionable and literally programmable. So I think, this is the next step to be able to have those interactions directly in VR.
Yes, and also as you mentioned that you don't just want it in text, but like right now, this space is something else than when we came in here, because it's been used to communicate and ideate these. And this is, the way this is organized, it has a meaning that is different from just text, because this is placed and it's And I can only imagine once you get, one thing is I like the way of sorting into categories based on different sections in the landscape, but also this in terms of adding functionality to thing. When one will become fluent in this and sort of speak that as a language, then I think it can become really powerful.
I hope so. That's the best.
It's really cool. Is there anything else you have on your mind or in your mind palace that we should address?
But I have a page for this. So I have the page of what should be coming and everything. Because there is just too much. It's all work in progress, but it's progressing. So that feels,
Well, if anyone is interested, then you can reach out to Utopia on Twitter. I'm sure you would love to have more people on board in discussing the ideas and maybe even contributing.
For sure. Yeah. No, I'm open to any suggestion, critics, code, no code, visuals, discussions. Yeah, it's taking shape, but yeah, it's more fun when we do it together, basically.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, thanks a lot for inviting me in, and I'm looking forward to see what the various Wikipedias, whether they are personal or public, will become in the future in VR.
Well, thanks so much for having me in the conversation.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
See you later.